when the question begged by Celia's introduction, why do you keep coming back? It's very much because of shared values. And having been a student at York, having started my academic career here, having come back in this capacity, I'm constantly kind of regenerated in a real respect for colleagues and the commitment to the teaching and learning experience, to challenging boundaries, to finding new ingredients, getting out of your comfort zone. And as someone who's an increasing rarity at this university and in this city, someone who was born in this city, whose parents were born in this city, whose grandparents grew up in this city, whose great-grandparents came to this city, it's something of a remarkable voyage to see how interesting and heterogeneous life in this city at this university has become. And I think in that potpourri sense, having had a pretty bland diet growing up, I've been on a mission to expose myself, try to get my head around all the amazing spices around me. And I think from a teaching point of view, I also have a comfort zone, and the challenge is, how to get outside of it, how to take some risks, how to go in areas where you don't control all the moving parts. You're not sure exactly how it's going to turn out when you start on it. And what I want to talk to you about a little bit this morning, and I'll show you a couple of brief videos on some experiences I've been a part of at Osgoode that I think represent that kind of pushing of boundaries, and again, where you end up putting an enormous amount of effort into the startup of something, really out of all proportion to what you're experiencing in that year. But it's the ripple effects, it's the conversations that leads to within and among your colleagues, with other faculties, other parts of the university, outside the university, and what a university can be for the community, for the broader society, that the payoff comes. And so if anything, having been asked to talk about what's inspiring, what's inspired me, I think it's sometimes these journeys where it makes very little sense, as you're living through them, because they're taking, enormous chunks of your day for a small group of students in an experience that is just going to be one semester, let's say. But then afterwards, realizing how worthwhile that risk-taking, those ventures can be. So for anyone who's living through that kind of experience, wondering, why did I get myself into this? Why did I ever embark on this approach? And we know, sadly, that sometimes new approaches are not rewarded immediately with adulation from colleagues or rave reviews from students, that we also have to have the courage and confidence to try things that won't always work perfectly the first time out. But to everyone who's experienced that sense of desire for doing something different, or having done something different, wondering, is it all worth it? Then this presentation will be for you. So I'm going to try to seamlessly open up this presentation. We'll see how seamless it is. That wasn't too bad. This is actually York IT Day, for those of you who aren't already celebrating it. And Osgoode is hosting what appears to be something of a misbegotten Trekkie convention today. So most people with the technical expertise to help, apart from those who are in the room, are over at Osgoode. So if anything does go desperately wrong, you see smoke coming out, that will be a sign that some reservoirs of talent are over there. Okay, so focus in on teaching is the theme of the day. The Teaching Commons, all the presentations cover a wide range of inspiring topics. From the Osgoode perspective, and again, you could go to any Osgoode colleague and they're going to have stories of what they're involved in these two domains. So I tried to pick really cross-cutting approaches that are taking legal education into new and interesting places, but building on solid and distinctly York foundations, in my view. And that's why I've chosen to focus on collaborative teaching in the community on the one hand, and interdisciplinary teaching through integrating creative arts in legal education on the other. And again, these are not things that we've invented recently, but they're both areas that we're doubling down on, both because it's incredibly engaging for the students, and that's the feedback we're getting, and because it's energizing for faculty and for the broader your community, I think, to make these kinds of investments in getting out of your comfort zone. And certainly for legal education, these are both things that are outside the comfort zone. And in fact, the videos which were shot at different times that I'll play for you, each just a few minutes long with some student experiences captured, both start off with, this is not what I'm getting in the rest of law school. This is different than the education. So again, I don't want to suggest that this has now become the whole curriculum, or that, for those who worry about how to staff and resource these kind of programs, you can do this for every student in every class. I think the key is, once you set an aspiration of what you want, then it becomes how far, how fast, how much can we do to get there? And as long as those are the questions we're asking ourselves, I think it has a reinforcing, culture-changing impact. And certainly that's been the experience at the law school. So why get involved in community collaboration? And by this I mean working with organizations and having shared teaching. So our disability intensive, for example, we do with the Arch Disability Rights Center. Students are at Arch. They're also taking a seminar at Osgoode. They're delivering services alongside Arch lawyers and getting mentored in what disability rights practice is. They're enhancing access to justice, and they're getting a deep dive education on the disability rights area. And this is shared between a full-time faculty member and a clinical legal instructor, with, again, the clinic contributing a range of resources in kind and actual, office space for the students, instructional time, and so forth, and Osgoode contributing the full-time faculty member some funding to start up a space where the students could occupy in the clinic. So it really was more than just assigning 2 people to teach a class. It was a holistic partnership that has also given rise, for example, to shared initiatives to create summer internships that are paid for students to continue their work, and a range of other speakers who are coming back and forth. So one upside of community collaboration is it's not just about what happens in the teaching environment. It can lead to a great exchange of organizational culture, resources, and again, we could never afford to mount a disability intensive. We simply couldn't spend the money that would have been required to do that. But when you collaborate with an outside partner, you're actually bringing revenues and resources into the university. So I can document, and do document each year, how many tens of thousands of dollars of in-kind and actual contributions are coming from our community partners, just as they can document how much the university is contributing to their public interest mission. So there's a great win-win, I think, from this sort of community collaboration, even though you lose some degree of control, right? It has to make sense for Arch. We have to be involved in problem solving that resonates with their community, not just what we think it might be interesting for the students to be involved in. And at the same time, we have to keep control over the academic integrity and the quality of the instruction. It can't just be Arch getting inexpensive legal opinions for what it might wish to have answers for. So there's negotiation, there's compromise. It has to be truly collaborative for this to be a success, and that's when I said it won't always work. We've had some great successes, and we've had situations where the cultures really weren't aligned, or we didn't know enough, each other well enough when we embarked on it. So collaborative teaching really is collaborative teaching. It really is experiential in the sense of learning about concepts and ideas through solving problems. It's not having an abstract foundation in those ideas and then getting hypothetical scenarios. It's beginning with how a problem arises in someone's lived experience, and then disaggregating what are the legal ideas, the broader social impact, the economic, the political, all of the different parts and textures of a problem that you need to solve. So it's also suggesting that lawyers are not technicians who can simply know a doctrine, but they have to understand what a client's needs are. They have to know what's going to impact the community in a positive or negative way. And I think that's enormously important when you're in a professional setting of education. And finally, and this is the part left off too much in experiential education, in my view, is the reflective component. In other words, it's not enough just to get a substantive education in a field and then spend your time solving the problem. If you don't then invoke the third prong of that stool, if a stool has 3 prongs, the third leg of that stool, which is the reflective piece. So what did I learn about this enterprise, whether it's legal education, engineering, whether it's an experience in life sciences or an experience in the humanities? What did I learn about my field by measuring the substantive ideas against how problems really arise and how they can be solved or not solved? And in many cases, in law at least, you're butting up against the limits of law to solve someone's problem. We have family law, for example, and that can resolve a conflict between spouses over child custody or resources, but in no way can that lawyer solve the underlying problems that give rise to family breakdown in communities at disproportionate rates to others, or that cascades into substance abuse or workplace issues or immigration issues. Law, in other words, is an important piece of a much broader community puzzle, and you see that when you learn these topics in real time in that context. Okay, and I'll come back to say a bit more about the creative arts side in a moment, but I had promised a video with some students talking to you rather than just me. So let me set up what they're going to talk to you about in this video. We wanted to have this approach of experiential learning in the community, and we know that one of the key areas, distinct although not unique to law, in which the field itself is part of the problem you need to solve, not just coming in. We didn't create, law didn't create a whole range of problems that people might have in the health world, but law can be a big piece of whether they get solved or not. But when it comes to mental health, law is actually a big piece of the problem. The mental health system we have is very legally driven, and the cracks through which large swaths of our population can fall are very much a product of that system. So when we wanted to engage in a law and mental health initiative, we went to CAMH, the Center for Addiction and Mental Health. And we said to them, we want to do this together with you, and we want the law students to see the perspectives that you're going to bring. We also want them to see the perspectives, by the way, of those who are bringing litigation against you for various kinds of alleged harm and misconduct. We want to have a 360 perspective on law and mental health. Would you partner and do that with us? And they were incredibly open to this experiment. And the other thing I like about it is too often experiential learning is juxtaposed to research intensification, whereas this is a clear example, and the reason why I chose it, where we're doing both. So it's a collaborative research course. It's about students undertaking directed research, each one supervised by an Osgoode professor and a CAMH professional, whether doctor or lawyer, depending on the area. And in each case, it was a mixture of that negotiation. So we had CAMH come up with their top 15 problems that they wish they had enough time to explore. We then had students select topics from among that list that we had already reviewed and worked out as of commensurate kind of intensity, would take the same amount of time, give rise to the same kind of learning objectives. And then that was presented by the end in front of a panel of both academics from the Osgoode and York community and lawyers, doctors, and leaders from the CAMH communities.
So I think what law school does really well is to teach you to think like a lawyer, and that's what everybody says it does. And I think in some ways it's really helpful to not think like a lawyer. So courses like the CAMH Collaborative Research course really give you an opportunity to go out and talk to people who aren't lawyers. And I think what thinking like a lawyer really helps you do is see the issues, but you don't necessarily get a very good grasp on what the problems are as they affect people on the ground.
It's not an ordinary kind of course, and it's both directed research, but it's collaborative. It involves coming down to CAMH in addition to work up at Osgoode and work outside a library and outside a database. It's talking to experts in the field, gaining an understanding of the problem, and then trying to be constructive, but also rigorous in telling CAMH not what CAMH might want to hear, but what CAMH needs to hear, and where the research takes the students is always going to be a voyage of discovery.
It's so different from anything else I've taken at Osgoode. It's been great to be able to collaborate with the people at CAMH and with other people in the class.
You learn a lot. You get to
have experiences that you just not have in class.
Mental health law is developed out in CAMH, and it's really neat to have litigation practice inside a hospital setting, and that's a great opportunity to expose young law students, young lawyers to that work. So over time, we've really been developing our student program, and Osgoode was a great way to continue.
One thing in meeting sort of the lawyers and doctors here is, they often have sort of thoughts or ideas about these subjects, and so obviously can sort of provide good guidance in that way, but they're also, I think in many cases we're sort of going deeper into subjects than they maybe have time or the inclination to do.
This type of course that has a direct impact stemming from the student's research, I think, is a very unique opportunity and a very powerful one for a young lawyer, but also for CAMH as a potential client for these young students.
The big question always is, will students want to do this? And of course, you put it out there in places like Osgoode. There's great choices. There's Parkdale. There's class, mediation, intensive programs, great courses, seminars. You never can see them in the field. So what was really amazing is to see some of our absolute best and brightest students show up and want to take on something for which there's no obvious precedent.
So I would say to other students considering this kind of opportunity, definitely take it. It's, I think, in my opinion, what law school and learning the law is all about.
To give you an idea of the projects that some of the students took on, one, for example, realized that under the current legal regime, a patient has the right to refuse treatment. And that refusal, when physicians take the position that the treatment is required to protect both the individual and the community from risk, means an appeal has to be heard. That appeal can actually take a fair bit of time to work through the system, a period of months. So for that period of months, you have an individual who is not receiving treatment but is in a hospital, who is not at liberty to leave but is not in a prison, who is exercising a legal right, but at the moment is simply in this gray zone where the rule of law doesn't really exist because it's playing itself out with limited resources, really complex issues. So you have a warehousing of individuals that is completely anathema to everything we believe in our healthcare and our legal system. And yet it transpires every day for dozens of individuals at CAMH. How can that be? How can it be from a law reform point of view that our system works this way? What do other provinces and countries do to avoid this problem? Do you have to either override a patient's right to refuse treatment or alternatively allow patients at their own risk and risk to their communities to be at liberty? What are the options? So a couple of students took on that project. Another project that came out was the reality that when a physician is aware that a person may be at risk to drive, they have to inform the Ministry of Transportation that there may be a risk factor. Well, every single person who is addicted, who's coming to CAMH, arguably is going to be at some heightened risk. So CAMH would routinely inform the MTO that these individuals may be at risk. Now, they're not saying we have any basis to say they're not going to be safe on the road. They're just fulfilling their statutory obligation. So MTO, because of scarce resources, took the position they don't have time to investigate all these. So they're simply anyone who's advised of being at higher risk, they remove the license from, which can, of course, take away someone's livelihood, their ability to connect with their family. But it's the risk-averse way to conduct oneself. So you have, again, no trial, no evidence, no proceeding, no fairness whatsoever. Everyone simply abiding by their statutory and risk-averse instincts, resulting in what seems like a minor injustice, but to individuals can be a massive one. So again, students took on similar kinds of projects. And again, the writing in each case was interestingly different. In one case, CAMH didn't want a research paper. They wanted guidelines that they could actually circulate, and underlying it, a background paper that explained where the guidelines came from. Another wanted a legislative submission, so they could go to a process that the legislature was engaged in, hearing through committees, and have a brief that could be submitted on CAMH's behalf. So in each case, the writing was different. It was responsive to the problem, driven by community needs with academic rigor and integrity. But again, these are also different than how we normally think of curriculum. They're one-off, right? We don't do this every year. The next year, we chose an entirely different organization, the Canadian Securities Transition Office, trying to set up a national securities regulator. The next year, it was the Judge Advocates General Office of our neighbors, the military in the Downsview base, who are, at the time, were engaged in sorting out international law obligations in Afghanistan with the coalition forces. So hugely interesting. Massive investment of time and resources to make these happen. And then they're gone, and next year you move on to something else. But the ripple effects of that idea of every year, let's pick one organization, go to them with an offer they literally can't refuse. We're going to pour resources and smart students to solve your problems. And what we want from you is an amazing experience for our students of what your life, the issues, the complexities, the possibilities look like. And I would put to each of you that every faculty has that mission as part of this university to be society improvers, problem solvers, with the skill set coming from each faculty's particular lens on the world. And I know this is not the only faculty where this kind of collaboration happens, but I think it would be great for York to be able to showcase, for example, each faculty's signature collaboration in a given year with an outside community organization that was enhanced by the efforts of the university, and the university could then demonstrate how it's been enhanced by its collaboration with the community. So this is not something, again, that I want to suggest is snap your fingers and it gets pulled off, but once you start down getting from standstill to motion, it's amazing how many people want to then be a part of it, want to then bring their own ideas of the organization to feature the next year. And again, students really feed off that buzz that this isn't a course you can take next year. This is the only time you're going to get this opportunity. Okay, so with time passing, let me move on to the second theme, which has a similar cross-cutting quality to it. That is to say, it's not just one kind of class or one area of, in our case, legal education that can be enhanced by this, but something more provocative and in my view, more inspiring about the university project. And that's bringing interdisciplinarity down to pedagogy and how you understand your field. So in our case, that field is law and justice. And we embarked on an initiative, again, without a clear sense of where it was going to take us, what it was going to involve, would it be a success, of having an artist in residence program where we would have a competition with colleagues and experts adjudicating applications to bring a working artist to the law school in whatever medium that artist works in, and for them to propose a student project, the course they would teach, the initiative they would take on with law students on a justice-related theme. And what I'll show you in a moment is the video from our first experience with a really remarkable photographer, Canadian-Croatian Cindy Blažević, who has done a range of work here and in Europe, and whose project was to document the closure of the oldest penitentiary in Canada, the Kingston Penitentiary, and to do it from the perspective of photo essays. So she wanted to document in photographs the spaces that were being closed, and then explore in a holistic way what led to those spaces, what creates our culture of incarceration, what are incarcerating spaces like, what is the role of lawyers and judges and correctional officers, the experience of inmates and their families and their communities in that architecture. So it brought together both the photography world, how do you construe and design a photographic exhibition. You had to have the substantive knowledge, and she partnered with a criminal law professor on our faculty to bring together that criminal justice perspective. Took students down to the AGO one day, took them to meet a geographer of spaces of incarceration the next day, and again, they all worked on independent research to provide the basis for the photos. So what did this do? Again, it literally brought a different lens to the areas that we think we know something about. It exposed students to the idea that all of the knowledge and insights that we impart and try to be a catalyst for in the law school are constructed. They're choices about what to call things, where to put things, how to create spaces for things. And all of that had a great impact on creating critical thinking, creating again an outward lens from the university on what's going on in the world. And this is the experience we have with our programs, whether clinical, intensive, experiential, or creative, what unites them all is it is incredibly memorable. So when you talk to these students afterwards, these are the experiences that stick to their ribs, to pick up on the cooking metaphor, Celia. And so as you'll hear, this was again created out of whole cloth, never to be repeated, but a remarkable experience for those who participated with Cindy.
A moment of experience in art can communicate something that 1,000 pages of words can't. As law students and as advocates for legal rights, we can use it as a way of communicating important ideas. And so that's in large part why I think art is an important lens with which to view the law.
So I signed up for the Artist in Residence program because I was really interested in how to think about law in a different way, outside of reading case books and kind of examining policy and engaging in it with a more kind of theoretical and I think artistic way of interacting with the law.
We also wanted to see all of our spaces as canvases, and we had a program that year that we called New Windows on Justice, and part of it was just exploring and celebrating the fact that light was coming in the law school, but part of it was saying we ought to be looking outward and inviting the community to look in different ways than Osgoode had in the past. So even though we're building on tradition, the idea was to try something new and to see, in other words, something that would come out of that, at least initially, involving some of our spaces as well.
We have used the photographs that I've taken, so I, in the meantime, have gained entry into Kingston Penitentiary. I took photographs of the areas that I was allowed to access. The students and I have used these photographs as a first and foremost as a jumping off point to have conversations and to explore through research and through the process of interviewing various stakeholders in the system.
I was interested to learn more about Kingston Penitentiary because as the oldest prison in Canada, it's been the original place where we've worked out notions of what it means to put people in jail, and the opportunity to work with Cindy and consider how this prison has developed and what it was for was, I thought, a particularly interesting example and opportunity at the law school to come at the law from a different way than just reading cases and statutes.
So the classes had multiple components. One part has been a regular weekly meeting where we've been talking about things from sort of advanced cultural theory to some of the history approaches to photography. We've also done a little bit of photography ourselves, and that's been paired with an independent research project. I investigated some of the history and theory around architecture of prisons, and we've also been doing some independent work on finding interview subjects to talk about the project as well.
What I think has been really great about this course is that we've been able to create a context for the photographs. And a context is incredibly important for creating broader understanding, broader meaning, and what's been really important for us is to not continue mainstream conversations and narratives about prisons and our prison structure, but to maybe look in corners and in places that would not allow, perhaps would not allow, can't judge, if we were in a classic law class.
All right, so there again you get a sense of creating also this ripple effect. So when the students mentioned they undertook some photography as well, it wasn't just photography. They took students from C.W. Jeffries and Westview, our partners in the Law in Action Within Schools program, to the Don Jail, which was also closing as a long-standing historical monument, to see its spaces, to meet some of its people, and again to pass on knowledge, because the best way to ensure someone is learning is to put them in the position of teaching. So having that impact, just like the CAMH and the ARCH and the other examples, also extended beyond the classroom. So Cindy is coming, and but for some of the delays of March this spring, it would have happened then, but it'll happen in the fall, to actually wrap part of the Osgoode building in the photo she took of the Kingston Penitentiary. And I exerted my only piece of intellectual interference on this point, because I said no toilet pictures will be wrapped around the building, because the pictures of washrooms are a big part of prison life. But I said it's an important piece of the exhibit, but it's not the one we need to choose to wrap the entire building in. So that will be part of a digital exhibit, and you'll have a link essentially to be able to scroll over a map of the Kingston Penitentiary, and anywhere that Cindy has a photo and the students do an essay, it will pop up. And so you can take a virtual tour of the penitentiary or walk by the Osgoode building and say, you know, what are those huge swaths of photos about, and hopefully provoke discussions throughout the university. The Artist in Residence program has also had some interesting other impacts. You heard me mention that we've started to look at our whole space as a canvas to tell important stories about justice. So we have, for example, a wall devoted to the Faceless Doll Project, which our Aboriginal intensive students have done as part of a nationwide program by the Native Women's Association of Canada to document the missing and murdered women and draw attention to the Aboriginal experience with the justice system in that regard. So that's, again, a wall that we devote to telling a different kind of story. Our international legal partners who do summer internships in the Global South on human rights now always take their camera, which is simply to say they have their phone with them, and document what they're seeing. That's then adjudicated, and we pick the top 10 photos from our international legal partners summer to do a silent auction around, to put a website exhibit together, and again, we have a wall each year devoted to that. So once you start down this road of how can creative arts help you tell a different story, it's not long before you ask really profound questions about what you think you're doing. Most recently, and this is the trailer coming soon to Osgoode, this year we're going to have two remarkable documentary filmmakers coming as our artists in residence. And what they're going to help us embark on is a new clinical initiative in visual advocacy. Because the remarkable thing about law is the exercise is about persuading people to accept either a story about facts or a story about principles. And in all of our life, we tend to persuade people in very visually compelling ways, either in person, by showing them things, and yet law tends to reduce this to numbered paragraphs in Sherlock's-bound factums. It's a completely counterintuitive exercise. What if we brought visual advocacy to that process, particularly in areas where what you're doing is telling a life story? So for example, in criminal justice, who committed a crime is very much a story about evidence and the adversarial process, and anyone who's watched a good Law and Order episode will know some of the constituent parts of that. But once a finding of guilt has been entered, there's a second phase, which is about sentencing. And sentencing has nothing to do with the moment of the crime, it has to do with every other part of that person's life. So how do you convey what someone's life amounts to for purposes of figuring out the right mix of deterrence, rehabilitation, and otherwise? Well, we're going to take the proposition that that's a great place for a short documentary film to take the place of or be additive to the written submissions, particularly in the Gladue context, which is a special court reserved for the experience of Indigenous individuals and their family, community, and lands. And there's a couple of amazing Indigenous filmmakers at York who've agreed to partner with us in that venture. So again, all of this coming very much consonant with traditions of legal education that are long-standing at Osgoode, but all looked at anew and with a critical distance because we brought another discipline's rigor and imagination to bear on it. So in both these cases, let me just pull back to the beginning here. In both these cases of community-based learning, creativity in bringing arts into the law school experience, into the building, into student life, into the curriculum, we are finding a new level of engagement and a new level of student participation. So we don't, in other words, do any of these ventures institutionally unless it makes sense from a student perspective, unless it enhances the student experience, and unless it's the kind of thing that we would imagine students would choose Osgoode, choose York University to come and be a part of. And that's really the point I wanted to finish on, is that as much as This is experiences that we've seen up close at Osgoode. Whenever I talk with colleagues from other parts of the university, these are the kinds of stories that people are most excited to tell, and that they worry get disseminated least effectively around the story of York. It's too big, it's too diffuse, amazing things are happening in this department, in that faculty, no one ever knows about them. So the other encouragement, which again takes virtually no time, very few resources, and the minute you start doing, you think, why aren't I doing this in every single course I'm a part of, is to do the making of DVD, right? The 3-minute YouTube after a course, capturing student experience, capturing your experience and reflections. If you've had partners, guest speakers, others, how did that course come together? Was it effective? Was it special? Was it memorable? What would you put in the 3-minute YouTube? And if you come to the conclusion, I actually don't think there's anything worth watching 3 minutes of on a YouTube after this course, then you got to ask yourself, why are you teaching it that way? Right? If you're not creating the kind of moments you'd want to share with colleagues in the community, then that's a great next bar to set ourselves to meet. So I would love to be able to go to every faculty and just in a given year spend 25 minutes and see snapshots of 10 different learning environments. And there's, if you have a phone and you have some light background jazz you can steal because it's in the public domain, you can do this short video, right? This was shot by a student over the course of an afternoon, right? We're not talking about licensing production companies and bringing in outside talent, and every faculty at York has all the resources already in place to shoot these kinds of YouTubes in almost every course they teach. And the question is, why don't we? And so that's the area I wanted to finish with, that this doesn't have to be every course at York, doesn't have to be community-based, doesn't have to involve this interdisciplinarity. But the ones you invest in can really help say something about what we value, what we want to put out there to ourselves and to our broader community about what a university can be and can do, whether it's in the public interest or as a driver of social enterprise or as a forger of new ideas and new ways of seeing. All of those, I think, are enhanced by these kinds of cross-cutting themes in our curriculum. So I want to leave a minute or two if there are any questions or comments, but that's what I wanted to share with you. And as always, I get inspired by just coming to days like this and seeing all the remarkable ideas and initiatives happening throughout this university. It is a feel-good experience that I dare say will leave people even more enriched than IT Day happening at Osgoode, which I will point out when I get back there. So thank you very much, and I'd welcome any thoughts or questions.